want to wait a little bit, we can.
Here comes Lindsay. So.
That would be it.
I call this 10th meeting of the Efficient and Effective School District Governance Task Force meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Sir. Senator Neal. Senator Tishner. Representative Bojanowski.
Here.
Representative Fleming. Ms. Abdelahad.
Here.
Mr. Baker. Ms. Masden. Mr. Nichols.
Present.
Dr. Nicholas.
Here.
Mr. Wartenberger. Ms. Ball.
Here.
Representative Tipton. Senator Nemus.
Present.
Representative Banta.
Please silence your cell phones, and Representative Banta will be unable to be here today. So do any of the members have any guests? Seeing none, we'll pass over the minutes at this meeting. And if the auditor has a public accounts, please you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's an interesting thing to switch from
please
over there.
identify yourself first.
Thank you. I'm Allison Ball. I'm the Auditor of Public Accounts. I have two staff members with me. I have my Deputy State Auditor, Shauna Kraus, on one side, and then I have the Director of Special Exams, who's the one who's tasked with dealing with these types of audits, as well as the one who represents me on the task force when I'm not available, Savannah Baker. Thank you. It's been an interesting experience to be on this task force, which I have been with you all. I've sat for some of them. My representative has sat for some of them. So we've been hearing a lot through that process, the same things that you have been hearing, at the same time that we've been developing the scope for our audit. So it's been a useful exercise to hear from the public, to hear from the members of this body, as we're crafting what it is we're supposed to do. And I want to give you a really quick overview of what exists in the background of this audit and what is currently being done on it. This is a massive undertaking, so there's a lot of things in the background of doing something like this. One thing I want this body to be aware of, the State Committee for School District Audits, SCISDA is what we usually refer to it as, is responsible for ensuring the accounts of each school district in the Commonwealth of Kentucky that they are audited not less than once every fiscal year. This is an ongoing activity that happens, like I said, at least once every year, and that has happened with JCPS. The committee members include the governor's office, the OAG, LRC, KDE, and then APA. APA actually serves in the role of chair, and Shauna on my side over here is the one who usually represents in that role. So there are financial audits that are done every year, all the time, and that's ongoing. And I think it's important for you to know this because what we're working on right now is a broad audit. It includes financial, and it's deeper than what you typically have with the SCISDA audit, but it's much more than that. And I think that's helpful to know because when we first began talking about doing this, there's sort of a question of, okay, you have financial audits all the time. What are you doing with this? What's different? And I'll just let you know that it's quite a bit different. You do have financial audits as an aspect of it, but it's much more than that. It's much more in depth, and there are other areas that we're looking at. And just so you know, the last financial audit was an unmodified opinion on the combined elementary through high school. So they got what's essentially a clean audit on the finances from Dean, Dorton, Allen, and Ford, which is then approved by others. But that's been done in the background, and that's kind of your basic level finances, looking at it to make sure everything's in compliance at your most basic level. The last time there was such a thorough audit as the one that we're working on was a decade ago. It was 10 years ago under Auditor Adam Edelin, and he actually did it at the request of the Jefferson County School District Board of Education and its superintendent at that time. So it was somebody requested it, they began working on it. It was a very extensive audit, and it resulted in some pretty significant findings. There were 45 findings and over 200 recommendations in order to strengthen the management and the oversight of JCPS. They were very specific, and it was mostly about oversight. Some of the primary ones, some of the most significant ones, were JCPS had not established an appropriate, consistent peer group for benchmarking. And that's really important to make sure you're doing things the way that you should. You have a benchmark, just like with investments. And that was not done at that point in time. Finding number 3, and I'm not going in order, I'm just identifying some of the major ones. Finding number 3 at that point in time was in comparison to 3 peer districts. And JCPS is a very large district, as this body knows. For example, Baltimore is a peer district, so large cities. In comparison to 3 peer districts, JCPS's central department employees were paid significantly higher average salaries and had more employees earning over $100,000 annually than the 3 peers. And so these were large cities, significant districts, and that was helpful to know at that point in time. Finding number 5, over 93% of JCPS teachers spent their personal funds to supplement resources for classroom instructions, primarily due to a lack of financial resources allocated to the classroom. So, in conjunction with the previous finding, those were important, figuring out, is the money being used the way that it should be? And finding number 9, at that time, board members did not appear to have the depth of understanding necessary to actively examine or question the budget effectively without significant reliance on the JCPS staff. So obviously you need to have some independence when you're a board member, and you need to be able to ask good questions to lead to the right results and oversight. Those are some findings from back then, from 10 years ago. And I understand that there were actions taken that addressed some of those, but the question is, where are we now, 10 years later? Have they gone back to some of the old practices? Are there new things that need to be addressed? And that's what this audit is meant to identify. It's a huge audit. It's a massive audit. It's going to look at many things besides just finances, and it's set to be released July 1st, 2026. When we discussed the appropriation for this last session, it was tied to really see how far you get 1 year and then go into the next year to finish it out. So we knew the whole time it was probably going to be a 2-year project. This is not a surprise. And we felt very strongly that when you do this, you want to do it right, because this is probably the only time you're going to get to do this in at least 10 years. And it serves as a model to the whole Commonwealth of Kentucky. So you don't skimp on things. You're thorough. You go down where you need to. And that's why it's set for a long time, because we want to make sure we cover everything that we need to. And this is a model for the rest of the state. What are we looking at right now? Because the bill was not particular about what to look at. It had some guidance, but we were able to listen to what's happening in the task force, as well as other areas where the public has addressed things. And what we right now are setting the scope as, some of it is financial. We are going to look to see whether JCPS has implemented or adhered to the recommendations from the 2014 audit. We want to see, where are we now? Have we improved? And whether JCPS is utilizing funding effectively and properly. The APA aims to provide an overview of annual audits, selected federal grants to determine compliance, administrative and teacher salaries, the board's ability to effectually utilize the district's budget. Those are all important. Finances are a big key to this, but it's not just that. Another thing that we were informed from the public that was very important is that we need to look at safety, whether this is a safe school district for students and for the people that work there. So whether JCPS is a safe learning environment and the working environment is also safe, we want to look at cybersecurity, and that may sound like, what exactly does that have to do with safety? Well, it does, because a problem in the past and in some areas is very lax controls when it comes to who's accessing what you're using in the school. When somebody quits their job, do they still have access to things? So cybersecurity is a big part of safety. We also want to see the system for reporting, monitoring, and investigating complaints. What are the security plans in the schools? This could have to do with the police, the school police that you have. Various things impacting that. Bus safety is a recurring issue. I know that last year when I was campaigning, that was a hot topic. Some things have been addressed, but we feel like this is important to look at in our big audit that we're doing. We also want to look at violence in the classroom and in the hallways, anywhere actually on the school property, and student discipline. There are several other things that we want to look at as well that don't kind of fall neatly into categories, but we're reviewing mental health resources and social services for students, tutoring programs, school attendance, and dropout prevention. That's a major issue right now post-COVID. There's a lot of study on this throughout the nation. Multilingual assistance and resources, and curriculum, as well as performance data tied to that curriculum, and that also encompasses DEI questions and things like that. So that is a very quick overview of what's going to be looked at. I mostly am telling you just to stay tuned because it's still we're still going through the RFP process. We are making sure that we have the right people with the right expertise to do this. So we are doing a lot of homework and putting a lot of effort into it in the front end. So we know we get one bite of this apple, and we want it to be the best it can be. So with that, most detailed questions are probably going to have to be answered at a later point in time, but that gives you a bit of an understanding of where we're at now, and also where we've been influenced by what we've heard from this task force and what we've heard from the public during this time.
That it?
That's it.
Wow, quick and succinct. I agree with you that we have one bite at the apple. Now we'll adjust, but it's very important that we do it right and not rush this. I know you do financial audits each year, and now you're doing it detailed. So what we're doing and you're doing is going to overlap. If we continue this on next year, of course, we'll be done 25. You're not to 26. We need to be able to get together, and are you able to on what we can, on what you have done at that time?
That's a great question. So really what you want to know is, can we do a preliminary report on what we've identified?
Or answer some questions in 25 of what you have done?
That's a great question. I might need to figure out if there's segments of this perhaps that can be addressed. So one of the challenges of doing an audit is you want to make sure that you don't reach a conclusion prematurely. And you also enter in it neutrally. You're not biased and you're not looking for a certain outcome. So because of that, it's usually best practice to wait before you comment on things until the very end, so that way you're not unduly influenced to push for a certain
So we'll have
position.
to work together on maybe there's some things that you'll have finished.
Yeah.
a
Yeah, if we have
particular
something-
section, or have information that we can use, or vice versa, or we may guide you to what we need you to do quicker if possible. Because it could be a great relationship to work together on some things instead of you doing one thing, we doing another, and they don't.
And they're not aligned. Yeah, very good question. Yeah, and that's one of the benefits, too, of being on this task force as well, that we can all communicate as we're doing it this way. But, yes, the one caution I would say is we need to make sure that whatever it is completed by that point in time, and I can review it with the team and make sure we can be as aligned as possible with what the work is that's being done here.
Great. Representative Bojanowski, you have a question?
Yes, a couple, but I'll try them one at a time. First of all, what other districts have had a comprehensive audit such as this since 2014, and could we get a copy of those audits?
That's a good question. I actually am not sure that there have been very many that have had comprehensive district audits. Fayette County had one, but I think it was around the same time, and I might have to defer to some of the staff in my office because this all predates me. But I believe Fayette County had one sometime within the last decade, and I believe that was also under Adam Edelin. But again, this is all a little fuzzy for me because it's before I got here, and I could review that with the office. You know, it's also a little bit apples and oranges because JCPS is so large that they're not always very comparable. But another large one that I know of was Fayette County.
If I may ask another question. So all the different things you listed, does your group have the capacity to do this? I mean, some of these things sound like things that maybe the Southern Regional Education Board or different outside agencies maybe, I mean, like curriculum and those sort of things. Are those all under your purview, or would you be contracting out at all?
We are contracting out because we want expertise. That's very customary. That's what Adam Edelin did as well, because you do want to have people who are well-versed in all these areas. Sometimes you even break it up and you have different people with different levels of expertise. But we're actually really pleased with what we're getting back on the RFP. And we know we've got some people who really know what they're doing who are ready to go.
All right. And if I may, just one more question.
Okay.
So you'd mentioned feedback from the public. What process was used to date to get feedback from the public, or is that just something that's in the future?
Sure. Well, some of it is being on this task force. We've been able to hear from people who have come in and asked questions. So we've heard the same thing that you've heard for the most part. Also, just what is publicly available in news media sources. I do have people that come up to me quite a bit. Being an elected official, people pull me aside and they'll say, I've got concerns here or there. That's kind of our main area of expertise, is having a tip line in the auditor's office. So we do have people that either do it in very formal channels where they'll call or they'll email. And many times it really is just people pulling me aside or someone on my staff and say, hey, we've got some concerns here.
And if I may make one more comment?
One more, and then others have questions.
All right, because we're running tight on time, I see. Just a little joke. Okay, I just wanted to comment. So I know I read over the findings report and some discussion about teachers. Every teacher in Jefferson County gets $400 to spend in the classroom. It's an Amazon thing. I just spent my last $26 last night, and it's just for classroom materials. So I do also spend a lot of my own money, but that's not out of necessity. That's out of, I just want what I want, how I want it. So just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you. That's one of the things that we know was in the report last time. So it's something that we will be looking at this time as well. Thank you for that personal experience.
Thank you.
Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Audrey Ball, your staff. I appreciate you being here, your hard work. I know you're also heavily tasked with KDE, a very similar type of process, like a performance review, essentially with this. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the scope of audit outside of the financial aspect, the governance, the administration. Are you all going to be looking at, let me preface this comment, the Kentucky Constitution and even the Rose decision, it talks about an efficient system of common schools across the state. And when you look at that definition of efficient, it also talks about effective. There are many great schools in Jefferson County doing a great job, but we have a lot of schools in JCPS that have been underperforming. If you look at the list of schools identified for CSI, comprehensive support and improvement, I think last year of 28 schools across the state, 24 were in JCPS. That number's down to 20 only because we don't identify every year. If we were identifying every year, there would have been 34 new schools across the state, including 14 from JCPS that would have been identified as CSI. Are you going to be looking about how JCPS is working with those schools to help them improve and get to where they need to be and those types of academic things?
Yes, absolutely. The efficient and effective guidance is what is underlying everything that we're doing in this audit. And thank you, Representative Tipton, for mentioning the KDE audit. That actually is something that I think will overlap in a lot of ways with this. That involves much more than JCPS, but some of it is the same. And that's an audit that will be done next year. We have a 1-year time frame on that one. Also contracted out RFP. We feel very, very good about the people who are going to be working on that. And I think that it's helpful to know that it's not just pieces. We're going to have a lot of pieces throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky that are going to be addressed by those two audits.
Mr. Chair, if I could have an additional question.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was briefly reviewing the 2014 audit from Auditor Edlin, and I was reviewing the 45 findings. Do you all have a good feel yet for how many of those findings have been fulfilled and how many are yet to be fulfilled?
I do have a feel for it, but I'm also trying to be very careful to make sure that I don't comment on it before prematurely. Because again, we want to be start off with a clean slate, neutral, and I will have some better answers for you upcoming.
If I make a brief comment, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I know one of the findings in the audit was that JCPS, due to its size, have a larger number of school board members. Members may not realize JCPS already has more school board members than other districts in Kentucky. They have 7, where other districts have 5. That was one of the recommendations, to get more broad representation. Of course, that has not happened. I have heard members just in conversation talking about that. So I'd be interested to see when you all do your report if you have a similar finding on that. Thank you.
Mr. Wartenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. This has been a big concern of mine for quite some time about outstanding items that we talked about and whether they're fully resolved. So you answered it. One of my biggest question is, what's in the scope of your audit, and does it include those findings from way back in 2014? So you've answered that. And I'll take it to mean also that anything, issues that have come up more recently, transportation, for instance, and the audit that came from that, those type of findings are in scope as well.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. And then I think Representative Stivers brought up things academically. So academically, we're covering that area as well.
I'm sorry. Could you ask that question again?
Yeah, I brought up Representative Stivers' comments around the academics or the effectiveness, and so that's within scope as well.
Yes, and I think it's helpful to remember, too, we're also doing the KDE audit as well. So there are some issues that are actually going to be better addressed through KDE rather than JCPS specifically. They almost work in tandem. So, yes, those will be reviewed.
Okay, and I just bring up the academic. The one thing I do know is the Cognia audit that occurred in 22, I believe, which is the CIS schools. So there's a lot of findings within that are all academic in nature. So lastly, going back to Senator Nemus's comments about you have a big scope, a lot of time frame to cover everything, huge amount of work, and any ability to provide findings along the way, but that obviously would require prioritization of your scope. And maybe there's a coordination of how to prioritize that scope in a way that meets everybody's needs.
Sure, and really what we're able to do, which is kind of nice, is there is some flexibility to this. So we set the scope out, but we do have the ability as we're looking at things. If certain threads uncover certain areas, we can start to go down those paths as well, which I think is exactly the kind of way you want to proceed with something like this. You sort of like look down and see, okay, is there more here that we need to be reviewing? And we'll have the ability to do that.
Last question, if I may. Anything internal audit related?
Could you be more specific?
I know there was internal audit findings back in 14, and I know they have an internal audit function today. I'm just wondering how well that function, that process is going.
Yeah.
And in particular, I'll say I have some concerns about the reporting nature of within that internal audit function.
Yeah, I think that would be encompassed because what we're doing is we're going to be looking at what has been recommended in the past and were those addressed. So to the extent that those are recommended in the past, and have they been effectively utilized, then that would be a part of it.
Yeah, and I'll just bring up the reporting structure sort of controls a lot of that on how well it's operating, I think, and how effective it is and independent it is, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is not just checking to see have you checked a box, but is it working?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have two questions. The first question is, and these are both about the scope of the audit. As you were listening, I was kind of trying to keep up and jot down the scope, and I get it. I just want more clarification. I was thinking about the murals and windows presentation that we had on the last one. Will the audit look at addressing investments and historical makeups and how they affect student outcomes?
Yeah,
because that was a lot of what I'll give you. I'm sorry to cut you off, but just want to give you more of the context of because a lot of the reporting kept going back to the social economics of some of these children, and so I know that we look at grades and behavior and things that are kind of matter of fact, but how deep, I guess, will the audit go?
That's a good question, and I think there's a lot to the question you just asked, and I would say some of it may go deeper than whatever is underlying. Some of what you're wanting to address may go deeper than the extent of what we're doing in this particular scope. Some of that sounds to be very almost scientific in what you're describing about some of the sociological impacts. I don't think it's going to be going quite as deep in those areas as maybe your question might be asking. Some of it will touch on those subjects, though. So I think it just depends on how deep you're asking to go.
Okay. The other one is back to this about the scope. On the last thing, kind of glossed over the DEI one. And is it looking at like the curriculum, the department resources, or necessity at all? How deep are you going into
some of that actually will probably be addressed by the KDE audit,
okay.
Because that one actually is probably more tailor-made for that particular subject. For this one, I think it's probably safe to say that we're looking at, well, what does the curriculum say, and what are the outcomes of those curriculums, and what are the cost impacts of those curriculums. I think it'd be tied to those issues for this particular one.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Abdelahead.
Thank you. Sorry for the general layperson kind of question, but when KDE was here, I guess a few weeks ago at this point, about their audit and like the release of that audit, the release of JCPS from that, was that at all tied to the 2014 audit? Or I guess I'm just trying to see how those intersected or not at all.
So what you're asking is the 2014 Adam Edelin audit, did that impact the KDE release?
2019, or right? Yes, yes, exactly.
I don't know that it would. I don't know that they were reviewing the findings from the 2014. I don't know. That's a hard question to answer specifically. I mean, it's their audit or their report. It wasn't really an audit. It was their report. So I don't know what criteria they looked at. They may have looked at some of those findings. I don't know.
Totally fair. The reason I'm asking is just because from the 2014 audit with the recommendations, how do we all as a society know that those boxes were checked? And that is 10 years. And then in 2026, that's 2 more years a year and a half from now. And so just that's why I'm asking, because what are the checks and balances after the fact when these, so not to say that your work, I'm excited about it, not to say that it's frivolous, but at the end of the day, after you do your work, who's following up every week, 2 weeks, every month to say, did you guys do what we said you should do?
Yeah, that's one of the recurring challenges of just having an audit. And I feel that frustration too. You release something, you show people what's wrong, what needs to be improved, and then you've sort of left it out there to the people who are responsible, and you hope that they do what you've told them to do. It is a constant frustration for me as well. I feel like, did you do it? Have you fixed these problems yet? My job is to identify what the problem is and to make recommendations. And then unfortunately, it's somebody else's job to make sure they're done. Yep. If they aren't done, I can keep going back and saying you haven't done it, which is often what we do in the auditor's office. Many times you'll have repeat findings. Sure. It may be this time around we'll have repeat findings from the 2014. But that is one of the constant frustrations of, in my role, being the person who's responsible for transparency and accountability to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, the people who are in those positions are the ones that are supposed to make those changes.
Okay. Sorry, just last thing to add, just to close put the bow on that, is that right now there really is no way to enforce any of the recommendations or any of the findings or recommendations from the audit for anybody, but specifically JCPS. So,
well, the legislature does.
Great, thank you.
Dr. Nicholas.
Hi, thank you. So is it problematic? You said that your predecessor had done some work with the previous audit. Is it problematic that you don't have that information from your predecessor?
Oh, I do have the information from my predecessor. No, I think the confusion was she was talking about the KDE, and was the KDE using Edelin's audit. And that's what I don't know for certain what the KDE was using in their report. I do have all the information from Auditor Edelin.
So did JCPS provide you any updated information since the 2014 report?
That is what we are reviewing right now.
So that came in last year, right?
Well, this is what we're doing. Sorry, this is what we're reviewing right now, what is happening right now. Yes.
Did JCPS provide you updated information from the 2014 report last year?
That information was not related to Adam Edelin's report. That was about the financials.
But did they give you that information?
Well, no, because it wasn't addressed. The audit from the SCISDA audit, which is a separate audit, is just a financial audit. It's only limited to those issues. For example, most of the findings, so one's broader than the other. We use the term auditing to mean a lot of different things, and sometimes it gets confusing because they may think that it's all the same. But the SCISDA ones are limited in scope, or are just about finances. They're not as broad. That's why they happen every year, because they just don't look at very much. It's just sort of a check the box, let's just review the finances.
I think what she's asking is, did you get any information on how Jefferson County Public Schools are doing with the Adam Edelin audit? And the answer, what I think, is no, because it wasn't asked of them.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So you didn't receive updates on information from the 2014 audit?
We got the usual. No, I'm not sure that I'm answering your question in a way that makes sense. Oh. We got the usual financial answers to our usual financial questions. But Adam Edelin's one was much broader than finances. It's like the one I'm doing now. It was very broad. So that's outside of what's customary asked in a financial audit.
And part of the reason I ask is that you've kind of stated that you can offer recommendations and then you're kind of helpless as to whether or not they're implemented. But I do believe that JCPS provides pretty detailed responses to many of the audits that come their way and on a regular and habitual basis, and that there was a pretty comprehensive contribution of information that came to your predecessor, but that it was much more recent than 2014.
There are audits that are limited about certain issues that happen at different times. So, they're not being obstructionists. It's not that they're not answering our questions.
Okay.
It's just some of those things aren't addressing those. This is such a broad one. These you don't do very often.
Sure.
These are like a once in a decade kind of a thing.
Have you ever issued queries to JCPS that they were not responsive to?
Not to my knowledge,
Okay.
anything that I've done. Now I've been here 11 months now, but I'm not suggesting that they're being obstructionists.
Okay. Thank you.
And to follow up, I think that if Jefferson County Public Schools has responded to anybody for the Adam Edelin audit, I think we would like to see that. So we may want to ask them if they have that. Representative.
So it's my understanding that JCPS provided a comprehensive response recently to your office within the last year. And I'd like to ask if Chuck Truesdale could just come up and speak on because I remember him talking to me about the district spending a long time responding to
we'll wait
audits.
on asking him to do that. She can answer your question as she can.
Yeah, I mean, they respond to us. They're not obstructionists. They give us things as we ask them. It's possible that some of these issues are related to what we're working on right now, which those are the things that I'm not going to comment on because we're waiting until we're fully done. But yeah, if I'm not trying to suggest that they're being obstructionists in any way. They do answer questions. The completed audits are the SCISDA ones. Those were done. They're financial. Those are the ones that have happened while I've been in office. One.
Are there any other questions of the auditor? Senator Tishner.
Can you go into any detail about the safety, student and staff safety, and what you're going to be looking at as far as that audit is going to be concerned?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm broad when I talk about it right now, because some of what we're doing is developing it with once the RFP is completed. Developing that out and figuring out, are there threads to go down, areas to look at. So it's going to be as broad as we can make it in the time frame that we have with the amount of money that we have. Also, if there's something in particular that you want to be addressed, I do know you've been outspoken about certain issues. Please indicate what it is that you're interested in, because those can be a part of the analysis.
Well, I'll just be specific there. When we did have the discussion a couple of weeks back about discipline, I had asked for a number of items that I never did receive. I don't know, maybe I missed it in my email, and that's very possible, from JCPS regarding the number of assaults. And I know they have their own police department within the school district, and I think that information could be accessible through the police department at JCPS. But that was, just number of assaults, teachers, students, vice versa, and just getting an idea of what that looks like. How often are police involved? How often are police reports filed? That's kind of what I'm looking at.
Yeah, those would be encompassed with what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Mr. Baker.
Thank you. And mine goes back to, I'm a little confused. So if you just break it down a little more clear for me. I get it, they're not obstructionists. But my question is simple. Did JCPS is there a copy of any commentary or anything from Adam Edelin's audit in 2014?
I mean, I know that they would have responded to the original audit because we have their responses. So that would have been like way back when.
Are we able to get a copy, I guess?
Yeah, I think those are all publicly available.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all right.
Yeah, and actually, let me hand it off to my deputy because she has something that might be more responsive.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll just kind of help explain a little bit of the audit response process. So once we conduct our audit, it goes through all the levels of review from our field staff all the way up to myself and then the auditor. And then before it ever hits the press, right, or it's posted on our website, we actually share it with our auditee, so JCPS. We said, hey, here's the 40. We didn't. Edlin, right? Said, hey, here's the 45 findings that we have. You all take time to read this. Again, we weren't here, so I don't know exactly who was involved in that response. It would be management, and so it could be board members, the superintendent, things like that. Happy to go back and look at those exit interviews. That's what we call it, an exit. We say, these are the findings that we have that we're going to report on. Do you have a response you would like to make to it? So they can make a response right then and there in the moment. They have 15 days to get us a written response. We then verbatim, we do not change it at all. If there's a grammatical error, we don't change it. The only thing we do is we take out names just to protect identity. We copy their written response and we put it into our actual audit. And so you'll see that with any of our audits that are posted on our website. If the auditee wanted to provide a response, it'll be in there. If they did not, it'll just say, the sheriff decided not to respond or something like that. So you'll know that is part of the audit process. We have to ask them in the moment, how would you like to respond to this audit? So yeah, all of that should be publicly available on our website.
Thank you.
Dr. Nicholas.
Thank you. Thank you again. So vacancies, truancies, discipline, CSI status, this happens outside of JCPS too, yes? Mm-hmm. Is there a reason that no other school district has been audited since 2013?
Well, I think I'm pretty sure Fayette County was as well.
It was in 2013, but since Fayette in 2013, no other school district has had a comprehensive audit. Is there a reason why?
I don't have an answer to that. I've only been in this office since January, so I don't know what interactions were had with my predecessors, Mike Harmon or Adam Edelin. There may have been discussions for other ones. There may have not been. I don't know. I have actually said in the past that I would be open to doing another one, perhaps a smaller one, so we can have a comparison. Mm-hmm. I'm not opposed to doing that. It's usually just a matter of cost.
Okay. So you don't know, but nothing was published. Nothing was made official.
I don't have any information. Yeah, I don't have
Only
any information.
JCPS.
Yeah, I don't have any information. And JCPS, one of the things about JCPS is we wanted to make sure it wasn't a greater cost on that particular district. It's a large district, so it's a good model for the rest of the Commonwealth. So we asked for an appropriation for the General Assembly because we knew that it's large, and the General Assembly might be willing to put up the money to do that. Again, it provides a model to the rest of the state. But this was, we thought, a good way to not put a greater financial burden on that particular school district. So, if we were to do another one, we could do another one, but then that cost goes on that school district. It's nice when the General Assembly appropriates funds. I'm sure that they all would appreciate it, but that's usually a factor that goes into this as well, because the districts themselves, without that appropriation, the districts themselves pay for it.
Sure. And it would be difficult to say anything definitive about JCPS in comparison with another Kentucky district because we don't have any audits of any other Kentucky district.
Oh, they're apples and, they're apples and oranges. So it's true that they're not exactly the same, but I'm hopeful that it can at least be look, these are issues that we've identified. You can, to all the other school districts and superintendents throughout the Commonwealth, that they can look at that and think to themselves, am I doing this? Am I following best practices? Because you do get best practices from an audit. That's just going to be, that's the way that it's a model, is that they can review it and look at it and see, am I doing the best that I can? Am I following these best practices?
Mr. Wartenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one more quick. We've talked a lot about scope. We've talked about the end date, 7/1/26. Mm-hmm. Do you have an anticipated time frame of nailing down, finalizing the scope, and starting the actual audit?
Oh, we're really waiting on the RFP right now. We wanted to take our time making sure we had the right people to do it. So we've been very thorough. We've been extremely thorough with that. We also have been working on the KDE one at the same time. So they do inform each other. There's some overlap, and we also don't want to be doing exactly the same thing. That's a part of the timeline for everything that we're doing, is the fact that we're doing both of them.
So it sounds like it'd be nice to get the KDE one finished and finalized before you went full bore on the JCPS.
Well, we're going to be doing them both at the same time.
Okay.
So we're not doing one after the other. But that does impact the timeline for how we're doing it. So obviously RFPs for KDE have to come out first before you begin the next one. But the work is going to be being done simultaneously.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Tipton.
Thank you. If I could make a couple of comments to maybe answer some of the questions that have been asked. On our LRC website, meeting materials for this meeting, there is a copy of the 2014 audit. It's like 300 pages long. And I just scrolled to the end, and there is a JCPS response to the 2014 audit at the end of that audit report. In regard to the auditor's office doing audits of other school districts, I think basically you're doing this because you were directed by the General Assembly to do this.
Yes, sir.
I will mention that the Kentucky Department of Education routinely does management reviews of school districts across the state, and there have been some school districts that have gone into state management control by KDE over the past few years. Currently, there are none, but that has happened in the past, and that work typically is done by the Department of Education through their management review process.
Well, I want to thank you for answering all the questions and having a very short, succinct presentation. We look to hear from you next year.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Chuck, would you mind coming up? I think Representative Tipton has kind of answered the question I'm going to ask you, that Jefferson County Public Schools has responded to the Adam Edlin report or audit. And could you give us any kind of update on what's going on now with that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. And just for LRC staff's benefit, my name is Chuck Truesdell. I'm Executive Administrator for Government and Community Relations for JCPS. About a year ago, September or October of 2023, then Auditor Harmon and his staff reached out to JCPS asking for, number one, a meeting to discuss sort of the audit that he and the auditor's office anticipated putting us through, and second, to get our updated responses on implementation of those findings and recommendations. We did that. We gave Auditor Harmon a fairly comprehensive response line by line to each of those recommendations. They also requested similar comprehensive responses to the KDE management audit, the Cognia review, and the Council of the Great City Schools organizational review. And so we have submitted all of those to Auditor Harmon. I do not know about the transition from Auditor Harmon to Auditor Ball and how that was handled. So I have no comment on what Auditor Ball may have at her disposal. But I will say that we have been in touch with Auditor Ball's office, and I believe December 2nd is our tentative first meeting with her office to get the ball rolling on this upcoming audit.
Representative Tipton, is that the answer that's in the back of the, or was that one? Is that what you said? Sounded like it was.
What is in the back of the report? The audit report is the initial response
so
back
it's not
from
the current
2014.
one. So
it does not include any update.
Okay, can you get the current one to us?
I would be happy to share those comprehensive responses as well as for all four of those.
Yes,
to the entire task force.
So yes, thank you very much for coming up. And since we had a good presentation, short, I want to explain that the co-chairs have received the suggestions of the task force, and we'll be submitting those. The two co-chairs are going to get together and submit the recommendations in the report. We'll pass that out to the task force members for your all's input on that. I'm sure your input will be, this is a great report, thank you very much. But I'm going to tell you that we've heard a lot. I appreciate all the members of the task force, all the presenters, all the public for being here, because we are here only to make Jefferson County Public Schools the best they can be. If you think they're failing, we want to make them successful. If you think they're great, we will make them the greatest. So anything about splitting the district or not splitting the district is something that may be recommended or not, but that is not the intent of the task force. We've heard many good ideas, suggestions. We've listened to the fears, concerns, and issues. I think that you know the legislature is concerned about this, that we think it's the most important thing in Kentucky is the teaching of our students. That's why we have this task force. That's why we have 2 audits going on to make sure that we can do this and do it right and to help in any way we can. So, and I'm going to tell you right now, the number one recommendation is to continue this task force into next year, because we don't want to implement a plan without having the knowledge of how to implement that just because it's a good idea. So, do any of the members have a quick comment? Senator Tishner.
I just wanted to say thank you to our citizen members who've made the drive down here all these different months that we've had this. And I know that's a commitment for you all, and I appreciate taking the time out of your schedules to be a part of this. I think that was really valuable.
No one wants to grandstand? Well, I was going to say, Senator Neal, we need to call him. So
I just having been a co-chair of a task force myself before, I just want to say thank you to Co-Chair Nemes and Co-Chair Banta. This is an enormous task, and this particular task force is a unique task and a very all-encompassing task, and I appreciate your all's work and dedication. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't get compliments too often. So, well, I know everybody's looking forward to our report. This meeting is adjourned.